Good evening. Welcome to ReSIA, to the last research seminar in Islamic art of the academic year. Welcome to you in person and to the many people online. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Shiva Mihan, and for this very interesting lecture tonight. Shiva is curator of the Islamic collections, in particular of the Persianate world at the British Museum. She received her PhD from the University of Cambridge, England, in 2018, where her dissertation on Timurid manuscript production, the scholarship and aesthetics of Prince Baysunghur's Royal Library, was awarded the Lee Douglas Memorial Prize by the British Society for Middle East Studies. And she has held curatorial and academic positions at leading institutions, including a postdoctoral fellowship as curator of Islamic art at the Harvard Art Museums between 2018 and 2020. And a subsequent fellowship in Islamic art at the School of Historical Studies, Institute for University in St. Louis. And Mihan's research centers on the history of Islamic manuscript production, artistic patronage, and the transmission of text in the Persianate world. She's currently also the founder and president of the Persian Manuscripts Association, which has got its own series of lectures. Her forthcoming monograph, Patronage and Manuscript Production in Timurid Herat, offers a new reading of manuscript culture under Prince Baysunghur, of which I think this seminar is a taster. And it's work in progress, as ReSIA seminars usually are. Bridging art history and intellectual history, the book explores the material and textual richness of manuscripts produced in Herat during the early 15th century, underscoring the often overlooked significance of their literary content. So the Shiva seminar tonight is entitled Invention and Refinement, Artistic Innovation at the Library of Prince Baysunghur. We are looking forward to this seminar, and after the talk, I will take questions from the floor here, and then I will move to read the questions on the screen. So please, colleagues and friends who are online, write your questions or comments in the chat, and I will read them out loud after the seminar. Thank you very much, Shiva, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for this really nice introduction. I will go to the desk, so I control there. Right. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're here for a talk on Baysunghur, you probably know about him. And so I'll spare you the usual overview of the Timurid and just go to the heart of the matter. For those less familiar with his name, I'm talking about this art lover, charming prince. Is it? In the 15th century, who was the grandson of Timur or Tamerlane, and you know that he was a founder of the Timurid dynasty, which ruled Greater Iran and some other regions from around 1370 to maximum 1507. Prince Baysunghur established one of the most refined intellectual and artistic spaces of the Persianate world, known as the kitabkhana. I should clarify that kitabkhana was not only a royal book repository, but also a place of production consisted of many different sections. So when I speak about the kitabkhana, I'm referring to that library, atelier, workshop kind of thing. It was a complex.
Just wondering if the screen share is working. Continue. Oh, just double check.
All right. Sure. So the library was active in Herat for only 15 years. During this period, it produced around 30 manuscripts on the subjects of literature and history. And those manuscripts are usually of exceptional aesthetic quality. But the library was also serving as something more. It was a space of aesthetic ambition, literary culture, and princely ideology. The early decades of the 15th century was a period of relative political stability in Timurid Iran, especially under the rule of Shah Rukh, Baysunghur's father. So Herat became a vibrant center of learning and artistic production. And with this setting, Baysunghur emerged as an influential political and cultural figure in his own right. Simultaneous to his success as the leader of several military campaigns, Baysunghur appeared as an erudite, a connoisseur, and an art patron. He was himself a skilled calligrapher and a poet. His library was not a passive collection of manuscripts, but a dynamic environment of production, innovation, and collaboration. Artists, poets, scribes, and craftsmen worked together in this workshop. To explore the function and structure of the kitabkhana, I think we have to rely on two significant contemporary sources. First is a unique document, the well-known Arzadasht, and second, the little-known and little-studied Jung-i Marathi, a collection of elegies composed after Baysunghur's death. We learn from the primary accounts that his circle included the most gifted artists, poets, philosophers, and musicians of his time. These two texts, along with the manuscripts themselves, allow us to reconstruct not only the workings of the atelier, but also its aspirations. After discussing the Arzadasht and the Book of Elegies, I will mention some of the technical and artistic innovations that emerged from this space: advancements in calligraphy, illumination, album making, and textual editing. My aim is to show how Baysunghur's atelier was both a center of refined craftsmanship and a reflection of a larger cultural project. Baysunghur's kitabkhana probably started to shape around 1418 after he came back from a campaign in Tabriz, and he brought some artists from there. But by 1420, it was definitely established and active. It was a courtly project, constantly in progress, and they were adding constructions, buildings, and places for different purposes. And it was carefully curated to reflect artistic sophistication and a particular vision of Persian identity. I will get back to this later. It is said in the sources that around 40 calligraphers were working in this atelier, but based on the contemporary sources and this document, Arzadasht, we can see that the number of staff was even greater than that. This is the famous document, Arzadasht. It's one folio. I have cut it into pieces so we can just see the images closely. And it is a report or petition on the ongoing projects at the library. This is a key document for understanding the organization and the structure of the Baysunghur establishment. It reports on 9 manuscripts with a artists who were working on them. And we understand from this report that in his palace in Bagh-e-Safid, a white garden in Herat, there were architectural projects on making tents and also working on manuscripts. So this is a unique document and the earliest of its kind, not only in the Islamic tradition, but probably in the entire world. This report was written by the head of the library and project supervisor, Jafar Tabrizi, who received the princely sobriquet Baysunghur very early on. He mentions 9 manuscripts in production with occasional references to the scribes and artists who were working on them. Based on such information, we can identify the painters and illuminators of a few works. That is invaluable information. We're talking about a period that we do not find many of the artists' names in the works. It's almost non-existent. Some of the scribes even were skipping from leaving a signature in the manuscripts. But this document is giving us the information, and we can compare the pieces, we can compare the paintings and understand who was a illuminator, who was a painter, and who was working on the rulings or other pieces in the manuscripts, which is very interesting. Jafar's reference to scribes also enables us to identify the unsigned manuscripts. And for the calligraphers, we have a little bit more information, but those information are not enough. If they're just a name or who was working for whom, and that's it. But when identifying the manuscripts, for example, 4 manuscripts of one particular scribe, that gives us the information about the life or at least the career of that scribe. A little bit more information, not ideal, but it's better than the limited mentions in the Arzadasht, in the Tazkeres. Arzadasht also offers a breakdown on the scribal work rates, which can lead us to the average estimated work speed. So you're looking at this slide. The red line shows when the Arzadasht was being written, and those are the manuscripts that had been in progress until that date, and then we have the rest of the manuscripts being finished. Based on the final date of the manuscripts, this is about just 3 of the royal scribes, Muhammad Mutahhar, Jafar, and Qutbuddin Hassan Shah Kermani. Based on this, we can get a lot of information about the speed of manuscript production in his atelier. For example, we can see that Muhammad Mutahhar was writing 100 verses per day. Jafar, he was involved with other projects. He could manage to do 60 verses per day. And Qutbuddin, 70% of a large page, which is almost equal to 70 lines. This is important for us because we see how they were organizing all this structure and how they were planning for the next projects. Also, it tells us what they were working on in the past. For example, we know that Muhammad Mutahhar was working on a Zafarnameh of Shami in 828. That was finished. In 829, he finished working on the Divan of Khaju, and in the late 829, he started working on the Shahnameh. But why are these information important to us at all? When we have, in this case, when we have 2 scribes working on the same manuscript, Jafar and Muhammad Mutahhar were working on 2 Shahnameh manuscripts. You know, the Baysunghur Shahnameh is very famous and important. Jafar was working on the illustrated Shahnameh, and Muhammad Mutahhar was working on unillustrated one. The unillustrated one finished later, but based on this calculation, which is quite complicated, we understand that he was actually the person who started it earlier. And this is handy when we look at the Baysunghur preface. It was a big deal at that time. They wrote a new preface to the Shahnameh, and that was written by the court historian Hafiz Abru. And most of the manuscripts afterwards, for centuries, they were copying that preface to the Shahnameh. And here we see that a comparison of the 2 prefaces show that they are not really identical, and there have been discrepancies, there have been changes. Knowing that Jafar was the second person to work on these manuscripts, at least on the Baysunghuri preface shows that all these changes were done by him. This is important because of the insertions, because of the nature of the wordings, changes to the stories, for example, in the life of Ferdowsi and all these narratives. That is important in showing that how Jafar was an authority. He could even change the court historian's narrative in those manuscripts. When I looked at the Arzadasht, I could manage to find some of the information that previously had been unidentified. One of the things was that this document is not dated. It's just a folio with no signature, no date. And I could find the almost exact date of the document. It is written in the third week of Ramadan in 830, which is July 1427. Knowing the date is important for us to identify all the manuscripts, where in the progress of the work they were, but at the same time, it tells us about the historical events, what was going on. At that date, Baysunghur was out for a military campaign. He was helping his brothers who were defeated by some Muhammad Oghlan. Both Oloq Beg and Muhammad Juki had a really bad defeat, and he was going to help them. And we know that he came back on 21st of Ramadan. So for the duration of the time that he was away, the head of the library had to write all these details about the function of the staff and the materials that they were using. And it's important to know that this is not only a report, but also a petition, because he was reporting on the amount of gold that was consumed. So the purpose of the document is also clarified. I have identified some of the manuscripts that were previously unknown and or wrongly identified. Some of the artists and scribes who worked on other manuscripts than mentioned in the Arzadasht were also clear the procedure of production and the scribal work rate that I talked about. These are the new information extracted from the Arzadasht. I also worked on the terminology of this document, but some of them are obsolete, some of them are unknown. One of the words that I tried to work and clarify was the term kishti. And it was a puzzle for many decades, probably a century, for all these scholars. In the Arzadasht, we have 3 sentences that they mention the word keshti. Maulana Shams has finished the keshti, 1 keshti, and has done the groundwork on 1 heading for the poems of Khaju. In another instance, he says, 2 other keshtis have been finished during Halkari, which is working with soluble gold, by Haji and Khatai. And the 3rd sentence says, another keshti is close to being finished by Abdul Salam. Like I said, the notes of the scholars about this particular term was keshti is a puzzling term. Keshti refers to a book, refers to a miscellany. Keshti is a floral scroll contained in an ovuloid, and it's certainly type of decoration in Mughal paintings. So keshti in Persian means ship. And they were so puzzled, what is that? But someone said whatever these guys were doing, they were not actually making ships, which is promising to understand that. So I went through the whole corpus of Persian literature from the Academy of Literature in Iran, Farhangistan Adab, and went through all the uses of kishti during the 1,000 years of Persian literature, and understood that it was referring to a vessel like a boat, and that was usually used for drinking wine. We see that in Hafez's poetry, in lots of other poetries. And also it was a measure for the amount of gold that they were using. Still, it is still used in some parts of Iran, and they pronounce it kushteh, so that is also the same thing. These are the containers for gold, and still we call them shell gold because they come in shells like a vessel or kishti. You can see in this image from an exhibition of Islamic manuscripts at Chesapeake Library that they have gold and silver in those kind of ships or kishtis, shell gold or shell silver. In some of the paintings of the past, especially in the Mughal court, we can see they were using all these pigments that they were utilizing for the manuscript production. You can see it in this image probably more closely in these shells. Okay, in addition to the Arzadasht that most of us are very familiar with, another significant source that contributes to our understanding of Baysunghur's milieu and the atmosphere of his court and library is Jung-i Marathi, or Book of Elegies. This text, often overlooked in the studies of the period, provides valuable insights into the ambitions of the kitabkhana and characteristics of the patron. It's a collection of elegies composed in memory of Baysunghur's death and serves not only as a tribute, but also as a reflection of the courtly culture and literary practices prevalent in Herat during Shahrukh's reign. Historical sources state that for 40 days after Prince's premature death at the age of 35, members of his court, poets, scribes, artists, were presenting and reciting their elegies to his father. And this is a collection of those elegies. It's a unique manuscript. There's just one copy in Tabriz. And it's a selection of 14 elegies composed by 12 poets. It was copied by this scribe Azhar. His name is written in a colophon. And it is dated with a chronogram, Rahmatullah alayhi abadan, which means 837 or 1433, the same year as the prince's death. The first elegy is exceptionally in Arabic, but the rest of them in Persian. And it is written very probably, it doesn't have the name, but the name of one of the scribes is repeated 3 times. And we think that it must be by Shams Baysunghuri, the prince's calligraphy tutor, who was very close to Baysunghur. And this explains why his poem comes at the beginning, not Jafar's. Jafar is the second elegy in the manuscript. Shams and Jafar were the only people who had the sobriquet Baysunghuri in their names, and they were constantly in rivalry. We have some narratives about they being in a fight, and some of them they both wanted to prove the prince that they were capable of doing a lot, and the prince was favoring Shams. In one instance, he accuses Jafar of being a liar and believing Shams, of course. This collection is imbued with metaphors of broken pens, closed inkwells, and silenced poetry, reflecting both emotional grief and a concrete halt in manuscript production, indicating how closely our artistic production was tied to the prince's presence. Like this couplet, نه شعر مانده و نه بزم و نه صورت و نقاش نه مجلس طرب و نغمه نه مطرب و آواز. No poetries remained, no feasting, no painting, and no painter. No gatherings of joy and melody, no musician, and no song. It mourns the loss of the entire artistic and courtly ecosystem, poetry, painting, music, suggesting the collaboration and performative nature of the kitabkhana and its centrality to the court life. Another poem, I just read the translation. The king who lived in every stroke of the pen, his library takes pride in the writings he created. And living in every stroke of the pen suggests that his contributions make him immortal. Which is true, and we're here talking about his works after 600 years. So in the Elegies, we also have strong connections made between Baysunghur and princely symbols, particularly through the association between falconry and kingship, tying him to the legacy of ancient Persian kings. Falconry and hunting with birds of prey was indeed his favorite activity, reflecting his name as well, Baysunghur, meaning master of the falcon. Apart from that, we have several verses comparing him to the Persian king Jamshid. You can see that in this image. He's sitting on the throne. The picture is depicting Baysunghur, but we understand that he was seeing himself as Jamshid. This scene is showing Jamshid teaching crafts to people, and that was the role of Baysunghur in his atelier as well, at least in his own circle, even not in the entire Herat. By focusing on the terminology related to bookbinding, calligraphy, and illumination, we can somehow picture what was going on. There are references to some manuscripts that were being in production. For example, they mention a Jung or anthology that was in the making when Prince died, and its production stopped after him. چون پریشان گشت و ابتر جنگ بعد فوت شاه گو muraqqaʿ از کبود اکنون muraqqaʿ کن ببر. Meaning the anthology became fragmented and dispersed after the passing of the prince, and he's saying to the muraqqaʿ, which is album, to wear a muraqqaʿ, which this time it means a patched cloak that dervishes used to wear, from dark blue or kabud, which was the color of mourning. This actually confirms what this Muhammad says in the Bahram Mirza's album, the preface of Bahram Mirza's album. This Muhammad says that they were producing a Jung, and it never finished after the prince's death. From the Arzadasht, we also know that there were two centers that they were working on, one for the artist, one for the scribes. The one for the artist was called Suratkhane, and the other one for the scribes was kitabkhana, or library. Suratkhane means picture house. So up to here, we used to think that picture house is a place that all these painting models are kept in. There were like practices for paintings in the manuscripts. But here we see that Suratkhane was called that name because there were figural paintings on the walls. And that's something important because we never thought it was painted, it had murals. And we see that one poet describes the sorrow of the Suratkhane, saying that even the faces of the walls are crying. This or other references to the musicians playing at the library while the staff were working shows that they had this holistic procedure of making manuscripts. Musicians were playing and the artists were working. So I don't wish to bore you with more verses from the Book of Elegies, but there is a comprehensive article by Mahmoud Alipour in a forthcoming edited volume. I think it will be published this year. Now I want to briefly mention some innovations under Baysunghur. Like I said, the kitabkhana was not only a scriptorium, but also a place where artistic innovation and technical refinement was encouraged and supported by the patron. Baysunghur was assertive about his taste. from the very beginning, we see that he was clear what kind of artworks he wanted. In the years 823 and 824, we see that he commissioned two Khamsa manuscripts. He had two groups of artists at his disposal. One was a group of people and the manuscripts that his father brought from Shiraz after the demise of Iskandar Sultan, Baysunghur's cousin. And the forefront of that group was Ma'ruf Baghdadi. It's the Shirazi style. We can see that example on the right. And then there was a second group with the Tabrizi style, and that was the manuscripts from the Jalayirid courts, and also the artists that he brought from Tabriz after that campaign that I mentioned before. So he had these two styles, and he could choose between the two. It appears that he commissioned both of these head figures, Jafar Tabrizi from the Tabriz and Ma'ruf Baghdadi for the Shirazi style, to copy and illustrated Khamsa of Nizami, and these are the results. We see that the Jalayirid style becomes the prevalent style of the Baysunghur's library, and we do not see, almost never, we see anything from the Shirazi side in these manuscripts. So that was the end of the choosing. He was so sure that he wanted to have the continuation of Jalayirid aesthetics. Another, if we can call it, invention of Baysunghur's library is that we have the term chalipa. It is a setting of each verse in one diagonal line, and we see that in the next centuries there are a lot of examples of excellent chalipas, but this is the first time probably that we see that this independent calligraphy format becomes formal. And here we have an example of a chalipa, which is said to be the head in the hand of Mir Ali Tabrizi. You can see the name here. Mir Ali Tabrizi, the founder, the canonizer of Nasta'liq in Tabriz, late 14th century. But this handwriting, although it is authentic, it is not by Mir Ali. It must be from the second half of the 15th century. So that leads us to Baysunghur having probably the first example of chalipa as an independent setting for calligraphy. And this is from a closer angle, which is written by Baysunghur himself. And this is the only example that we have from Baysunghur's Nasta'liq writing. And we know that Nasta'liq became the official court script for Baysunghur and all his scribes. And that was the place that Baysunghur preferred Nasta'liq, and Nasta'liq became prevalent in the next centuries. And all of these big names in Nasta'liq comes from the tutelage lineage of Jafar, like Azhar, Sultan Ali Mashhadi, Mir Ali Haravi, and others. Maybe we are looking at one of the early examples of gold sprinkling. We can't be sure, but it was at those decades in the first half of the 15th century or a bit afterwards that we see gold sprinkling is a practice that they are doing. When I searched all these primary sources, I could only get back to trace back to Baysunghur's atelier, what they were practicing we do not have an example, but we know that one of his scribes was responsible for this technique. Some of the primary sources say that Muhammad Mu'min was a person who was excellent in gold sprinkling. It means you just put pieces of gold on pieces of paper, or beautifying either the page with the paper or the calligraphy itself. So Muhammad Mu'min was a son or tutor or pupil of Abdullah Murwarid. And in some sources, we see that he was named as a person who invented gold sprinkling technique. But Qazi Ahmad Qawmi states that it was Murwarid's master or teacher, Abdullah Tabbakh Harawi, who first practiced gold sprinkling and was good at it. Qazi Ahmad also mentions Simi Nayshaburi, another scribe from the 15th century. He died probably after 1436, and he wrote a treatise with detailed instructions on how gold should be prepared and applied for sprinkling on a paper. And it's not unlikely that Sheikh Mahmud, who did this Divan of Hafiz, also learned this technique from Abdullah Tabbakh, because they were working at Baysunghur's atelier together. A verse in Ja'far's elegy could also be interpreted as mentioning gold sprinkling. در سواد ملک او یک کاغذ بیزر که دید، زان زرافشانی که کردی بر بیاض صفحه ها. Literally meaning that no one could find a paper without gold on it in his realm, because of all the gold sprinkling that the patron had done on pages. And the first layer, Ja'far, is obviously referring to the, spending money on all these projects and the lavishness of his patron, but he probably also was talking about gold sprinkling as a technique, because his poems are multi-layered. We always have lots of different layers in his poems. Unfortunately, this speculation remains as references in primary sources, and we do not have examples in manuscripts from Baysunghur's court. But Abdullah Tabbakh was the scribe of several Qurans. One of them is this sumptuous example that is now in the Chester Beatty Library. And the other one is copied 10 years after this. This one is 1431. And there is another one at the Asangot's Library in Mashhad, which has gold sprinkling on some of the larger scripts. It's not really clear, but maybe, I don't know if it is clear or not, but you can just see a few of these really tiny dots of gold on the script. In addition to the innovative artistic practices in illumination and layout, another crucial aspect of the kitabkhana was text editing. This is something that no one has ever mentioned or studied. And when I was going through the text and comparing them to earlier editions, I found that there were very bizarre changes, and this is really interesting. We know that Baysunghur was in favor of making new recensions, making new editions. And here we see a page of the Shahnameh, and it says that اشارت همایون نافذ گشت که از چند کتاب یکی را مصحح ساخته مکمل گردانند. So the prince ordered that they work on one manuscript of the Shahnameh to make it correct and purified. Also to make it complete, meaning bringing all other verses from everywhere, anything from the Ferdowsi that they could find to this one manuscript. This is the reason that no one wanted to really study the text, because they were thinking that it's full of interpolations and it is not authentic. Why should we go through the whole thing? But it leads us to the genealogy of the manuscripts of the Shahnameh, which is a probably the most important text in Iran, to understand what kind of manuscript they had access to and which ones they were considering as valid. There is a study by Ali Shapuran on this. It's also coming in this edited volume. So these kind of notes about the order of the prince on working on the manuscripts, we can find them in Kalilo Demne, under ReSIA, under Shahnameh. It was an unprecedented approach to textual content, and we do not have any other library thinking about this before. We have Mustafi, something like 50, 80 years before, but that is totally a different story. It's the way that he was working on the Shahnameh is totally different. The ex-libris of the Kalilo Demne also clearly states that he ordered to refine and purify the text. In the manuscript, in the frontispiece illumination of this manuscript, which was the ReSIA or Berenson anthology, and it was carved up at one point. It is now in the Chester Beatty Library. For a long time, we did not know what this manuscript was. It was coming from, but now we know that it is part of the ReSIA. At the beginning of this manuscript, also we had the order of the prince to collect all the rare treatises and to purify the text. And they are still rare. We do not have more than 1 or 2 examples throughout the world. The comparison of the text shows that they updated the language. They got rid of the obsolete or Arabic phrases and they replaced them instead with Persian ones. In general, Baysunghur editions are usually tending towards pre-Islamic Persian origins. This is something interesting. They shorten the phrases, the praises of the prophet. And we're talking about the court at the same time that Shahrukh was the king, and he was a strict Sunni person. He got rid of all the wine bottles, if you call them bottles, wine containers of Baysunghur after his death. And we have this historical record that the whole city, for a week, it was smelling like wine and everyone was intoxicated by the smell. So he was tolerating the son drinking all the time and being depicted with a bowl of wine in his hand. But this is a step forward. I mean, he just got rid of the praise of the prophet, make it from one paragraph, just one line was left, and even sometimes deleted the verses from the Quran, which is very, I don't know what to call it. Anyway, some of the very well-known texts like the Golestan of Saadi also, who they can see that everyone in the society knew them by heart, but you can find them even in the Golestan of Saadi. And I think that there must have been a scholarly team for such editorial endeavors, almost certainly with the court historian Hafiz Abru and Jafar Baysunghur in it. But it was a prince who demanded the text to be edited, and the way it should have been amended. He had very straightforward orders for each text, one to be purified, one to be collected, one to be correlated or corrected. And we have 2 copies of the Divan of Hafiz penned by Jafar, one before he came to the Baysunghur court, one afterwards. The one before is very similar to other copies. The one afterwards, under Baysunghur's rule, we see that there were some changes in the wordings. They were trying to simplify some of the words or replace some of the terms. And that shows that it wasn't Jafar who was the mastermind behind that. So to conclude, Baysunghur's kitabkhana represents one of the most significant and innovative manuscript ateliers of the Timurid period, contributing not only to the advancement of artistic expression, but also to the refinement of cultural and literary practices. Jung-i Marathi offers a unique glimpse into the intellectual and artistic goals of the kitabkhana, while the Arzadasht serves as an invaluable record of the practical and technical aspects of manuscript production. As we reflect on the legacy of Baysunghur's library, we see not just a cluster of beautiful manuscripts, but a patron who was aware that he was building a legacy, probably because he had this prophecy when he was younger that he will die soon, and he was so aware what is remaining after himself. He was particularly looking up to ancient Persian kings, seeing himself as following their path, and he did not wish to be remembered as a military leader. We don't see any depiction of him in a battle scene, or a mighty ruler, but more as an open-minded party prince surrounded by musicians and artists. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes. Thank you very much, Shiva. That was really wonderful and a very rich talk. And you've done an amazing amount of work on all aspects of Baysunghur's library legacy, the manuscripts themselves, the documentation, which was very interesting that you started with that document, with amazing document. Yes, I mean, I have many questions, but perhaps, are there any questions first from the audience? Yes?
How many of the 30 manuscripts known to have been made in that kitabkhana still survive, or bits of them?
We do not know, does it have
Uh,
We do not know how many they produce, probably much more than that, but we have 30 manuscripts that are certain, with a ex libris, with a Baysunghur sobriquet, with something that shows us it is certainly coming from that library. But there are up to 40 manuscripts. Some of them, we can say that these are Baysunghur by the type of the aesthetics, but they cannot be for sure.
I was wondering about the last part that you were talking about, this editorial enterprise, which obviously, I mean, editing books is a very old thing, but the way you explained it, it was quite advanced and organized in different sections. And I was wondering whether you could expand a little bit about the significance of this term, purifying the text. Because then you said, you know, was it to purify it from words that were of Arabic derivation, or?
It's certainly, it doesn't have the approach that we have towards pure Persian. So you know that how it was a big thing in Iran just to get rid of all the Arabic words at some point and speak pure Persian. They do not have that kind of approach. It's so interesting. They have certain criteria for different manuscripts, and with each text, their approach is different. For example, when they look at a Tarikh al-Wassaf, they know that they have the original signed by the author. Today we just have one of the 4 volumes of that. But when you compare it, we see that it's exactly the same, very, very little amount of variance. So when they were so sure and certain about a source, I think they were tending not to intervene that much. But for something from like the Shahnameh, it was many centuries after Ferdowsi's work. And there were lots of different Shahnameh versions around, you know, that we have bunches of like the Shahnamas in the east, in the west, and how they were being, changed by the scribes or by the patron. The criteria, the thinking was different. And so they have this collection of different manuscripts. And then they have some sources like Taj al-Mawasir with 100 verses from the Shahnameh. And suddenly probably he thought that, some of these verses are not in this version of the Shahnameh, and some of those are different. So maybe we should have one standard Shahnameh with all the poems of Ferdowsi, and they were not critically looking at, is this by Ferdowsi or not? They were just collecting everything. And this approach of collecting everything in one manuscript, we can see that with the poems of Khaja Kermani, for example. They decided to have a divan of Khaja Kermani at the beginning and bringing everything. And right in the middle of the way, they thought that, we should bring the prose text as well. So they added the prose text to the same manuscript. And we see that today it is one of the most important collections of Khaja Kermani's works for editors. The same approach with Divan of Imaduddin Faqih Kermani, and we do not have anything from the Divan of Amir Khosrow, but he started that project as well. And after several years, they find 2,500 verses somewhere that they didn't know about, and they think that this is not feasible, to stop it. Because there are like 500,000 lines by Amir Khosrow.
Thank you. Any other question here? I have, please, colleagues online, write your questions in the chat. I'll get to you in a second. I have another question.
Yep.
And, in this innovative kitabkhana, but also suratkhana.
Yes.
I mean, I was wondering about the input of foreigners, of other people from other cultures. If there is any evidence that was the case, because I was thinking about the sprinkling of the gold and the fact that that's also Chinese practice.
Yes, it's a Chinese practice. They got it from Japanese traditions. And we do not know, according to Yusen Yu, we do not know any example of gold sprinkling in Chinese tradition until 15th century. So it is the same time.
Well,
we're talking about the 15th century.
Yes.
But in Iran, you can see it's not gold sprinkling, but in the Ilkhanate manuscripts, sometimes you see the pieces of gold were on Qurans.
Yes.
On the scripts. So that was probably the beginning. And it is more connected, the Ilkhanate, to the Chinese traditions. They probably were exchanging this practice centuries before. And we do not have an example in the Chinese tradition prior to this date either. But it is very probable, because all the Chinese people were coming to Herat. The embassies that they were sending, the exchanges that they were, probably that was where the idea came.
Right.
We cannot be sure. Unfortunately, evidence is not enough about that.
It's not there.
Yes.
Any other question here? Okay, let's see. Okay, so we have Bahira Randi, not sure it's only me or anyone else can't hear the room well. Oh, sorry, this was something at the beginning. So is any question or any comment in the chat, or people who want to come to the phone directly? Sorry, are you hearing me? If you want to come to the phone directly, those who are online, just let me know, and we can actually open the microphone. Otherwise, please write in the chat. Right. Any other question here or comments? Yeah.
It's about the gilders. You mentioned in the document that list of all the people being held, being listed. You mentioned quantities as well of gold. So
Yes.
What does that document say about the gold decorators or the gilders?
Yeah, we have several sentences with references to gilders. Some of them are using the gold for rulings, meaning these lines for the text blocks. And some of them were covering the base of illuminations. For example, one of them, who finished one of these kashtis using a lot of gold, he was working on 10 of these sarlos in the Divan of Khaju. And his name was Mahmoud, I guess. And it shows that they were using the soluble gold for the, grounding of these manuscripts, the illuminations, or sometimes they were using them for the writings within the text or the illumination within the text. But it's interesting that now we can look at the Baysunghur Shahnameh, for example, and we know the name of the person who was doing the rulings. We know the person who was putting the gold. We know the person who was in charge of that particular type of paintings and another type of paintings. So it was a collaborative work. It wasn't like this manuscript is with you, go for yourself. It was everyone was collaborating constantly, doing one part of the job on each project.
Is there, maybe, I'm sure not in this document, but in other references, can you tell which one started before who? You know, sometimes you find the painting goes over the last.
Oh, yes.
Or the text get chopped or.
Yes, exactly.
Syntheses. Do you know which craftsmen started and who followed them?
I think it depends on the library. It changes from this library to the next. But maybe they were different for manuscripts. But in case of the Shahnameh, and I think that was probably for all of these manuscripts, the first person was the scribe. He had to write the text and then leaving the places for the rulings and these things. But here they were collaborating. So the painter was saying that what kind of a space they need, and that would be left aside. And then the ruling maker would do the ruling, and then the painter. And there was someone who was doing the sketches and the drawings. Then the painter would come and put the colors. Even for that, someone would put the colors, and the final stage was the person who was working on the portraits.
This is something that it's also in our painting of much earlier period, so from the 12th and 13th century, in which the text is the first to be written on manuscripts, and then the paintings are added. And of course, we have much less documentation for those periods, so we don't really know exactly, but we certainly see from the manuscripts themselves that there is a strict collaboration between the scribe and the painter.
Yes.
And we also know that sketches were done before, usually in a sort of pinkish ink. And you can see also different hands and different sort of level of of achievements. So some are very accomplished and some others are a bit more sketchy. And then we don't know whether there was someone else coming in to actually add the colors and to what extent. But we certainly have evidence of freehand So in other painting, a lot of the images are outlined first in the sketches, as you said.
Yes.
But there is a certain amount of freehand painting, so that hasn't been prepared in advance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had a repository with lots of models they could get ideas from, they could imitate. But it was a magnificent establishment. There were like 70 people just working on washing lapis lazuli, for example, to make it the purest possible. And we see that is why when after 600 years you look at these paintings, they are so shiny still, and you think that they were like 100 years old. Even in the Qajar era, you do not see anything like that.
And were they producing paper?
Probably in Samarkand.
Mm.
Yeah, that is the most probable place. In some of these manuscripts, when we look at, they are the terme that are called terme of Samarkand. And we have lots of references in primary sources to workshops in Samarkand, but I don't think that they were producing it in Herat. They were probably bringing very fine and nice examples in the samples from China. And we have these beautiful paintings on sheet of paper. But within the country, I think it was Samarkand, yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Component for building with the instructions.
Oh, yes, it's treatise.
Because vessels you showed, which are very interesting, there's three. They were dated 1421 and 1420. So when was the treaty done? Do you think it was
Yes.
The techniques and
Exactly. So the Kishti, which is the term, is written in this document that is dated 1427. And that treatise by Simi Neyshaburi must have been done around the same time, probably because we know that he was alive until 1436. And he was a scribe at the court of Shahrukh and Baysunghur. There must be something before, I don't know. I can't remember now because if you look at this collection of all the treatises on bookmaking, which is by Maya al-Harawi, I think that is one of the earliest ones. In the 15th century, we have a few, but in the 16th century, we have quite a lot of them, and calligraphy and gilding and techniques. And it is called Kitab Ara'i Dar Tamaddun Islami, which means the arts of the book in Islamic tradition. It's in Persian, but it is very complete.
And that vessel that you identified, it's not a ship, it's not a boat, but it's in a shape of a boat. But then, so was it a conch? Because I think you showed a detail that looked.
It's like a the vessel is of what do you call a shell?
A shell.
Yes.
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 So they were using shells as well, like in Europe.
I doubt it, but I'm not sure.
That detail that you showed from a manuscript.
Yes, those are from the Mughal period.
Oh, right.
Right.
Okay.
They are like 100 years onwards later.
After.
But they had these vessels that they were using for drinking. I'm not sure. Maybe they were using shells. Maybe they were using those things. I don't know.
Right.
It's not clear to me. We need more
because it's used in Europe.
Yes, that's a really good question, actually. I should think about it. Yeah.
shell gold.
Shell gold, yes.
That's a thing in Persian. That's a term.
This is an English term. If you want to get that kind of gold now, today even, you go to the shop and say, I want shell gold, and they will give you. Yeah.
Is it liquid gold
It's soluble.
or soluble?
Soluble, yes. You can just add a little bit of water. It has been processed.
Form?
It's not in powder form. Shell gold is not in powder form, but you know, the gold leaves, you work on them a little bit with honey and with gum arabic, and then you grind them, you put them in water, and then the residue becomes that gold that you can use with water. Yeah.
And it's quite thick. The liquid gold, I think it's lighter in a
Yes.
way. It's less.
You can choose if you want it lighter or thicker, because you choose the amount of water when you
Yes,
add this. Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
It's water soluble, you're saying.
Yes.
You can probably spray it if you wanted to. Spray.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
They used to have horsehair for gold sprinkling. But I'm sure that they were using other stuff as well. Maybe some brooms.
Yes.
I don't know, brushes.
And it's a very, very precise work when the gold sprinkling is done on the letters,
Exactly.
on the
Yes.
calligraphy.
They have to control the amount of gold not to
Yes.
cover the thing.
And you should one. And initially I thought, where is the sprinkling? And then I sort of looked.
They say, yeah, part of it is damaged, but there are some very tiny. But in the Ilkhanate manuscripts, the patches of gold are larger. They really glitter with gold. There is one manuscript in the museum in Qom, in Iran, which is magnificent. It's just like, when you open it, it's like sun is shining to your face. It's so beautiful.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I mean, some of those Chester Beatty Library ones,
they are
when I
really-
worked there, and I used to say to people who came, put your sunglasses on,
Yes.
because now we're going to be hit by it.
Exactly. Some of them are magnificent.
Yes.
I agree. This Quran by
Oh, that's magnificent.
Abdullah Tabbakh, it's so beautiful. I have it as my background. Probably one of the most beautiful Qurans I've seen.
Last question from me. Did you mention also that they were making book bindings?
Yes. We have references to book bindings in the Arzadasht.
Yeah. I wonder which section of the workshop that was, because that's quite different from.
Yeah, I think it was clearly closely related to the other parts, because he is making this report of the kitabkhana, and he's saying that for the manuscript that it was just probably 5,000 verses of the Shahnameh, meaning 1/10 of the book was done, but at the same time the binder was working on the binding of that manuscript. Because it had a lot of chiseling, a lot of working on the leather, and they are really delicate in, time consuming to do that kind of intricate
Yes,
design.
it's interesting that you said that they were connected, because I always wondered, and I'm still looking, whether, the decorative motifs that you find on the bindings have a link to the decoration inside the book. And in some cases, I think it's quite clear.
Yes.
In some others, no.
Yes. I think when we look at some Mamluk manuscripts, probably we see that more, because mainly they use geometric patterns. But in these manuscripts, the patterns are mainly organic. You see the arabesque everywhere. You can see the link. But with the Baysunghur bindings, I cannot remember that I see, for example, the pattern on the binding to be repeated inside. Not exactly, but for example, you have a torange at the beginning on the binding, and then you open it on one of the sarlos, the torange is vertical, but it's designed in different ways. I think the doublure of the Kellodemna also have animals, if I remember correctly. So that has a reference to the stories inside, saying that these are the fables about animals. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let me just have a last check here. Don't have anything on the chat. So
All right.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.